Hey listeners, and welcome to another episode of The Coder Career. I'm your host, Cameron Blackwood. Today's guest is Adam McMurtry. I've been a follower of Adam's on LinkedIn for quite a long time now because he is always pushing some really exciting projects, and it seems like he's constantly working on a million different things. His insight is also really interesting, and I love his perspective on things. He's also a fellow career changer, starting out working on factory floors before going on to take on senior positions working in technology departments of several of the largest financial institutions in the world. Adam's also lived and worked abroad and has even delivered technical talks in other languages such as Mandarin, which I'm sure we can agree is very impressive. Quick bit of housekeeping before we start. If you do enjoy the show, do remember we have launched a Patreon. No pressure at all, but feel free to subscribe to that if you want some really cool bonuses. And if you want to get more involved in the community, also do feel free to join our Discord. The server is growing and growing, and we're holding lots of Discord community events, so it's a lot of fun and some really great people on there. Without further ado, though, it's time to grab a coffee, push those commits, and enjoy the show. Hi, Adam. How you doing? Thanks so much for joining me.
I'm good. It's a pleasure to be here.
Good. So for the audience who aren't familiar with you, haven't come across you perhaps on, I guess LinkedIn is probably one of the biggest channels that you post on. Do you want to give a bit of a background about who you are, what you do, and why you're being basically on the Coder Career today, like what you work on?
Yeah, sure. So I'm predominantly a sort of an engineer that's been working in fintech and finance for past 10 or so years, maybe a bit longer. Where I've been doing my main stint as sort of head of DevOps, head of data, and head of cloud. So I kind of pivot across different platforms, really sort of focused on automation. And so over the past sort of 10 years, I've been focusing heavily on sort of trying to adopt sort of more healthy frameworks across different environments, and it sort of worked around the world. So I've worked in China, India, Middle East, America, Europe, and because a bit of a plug here, but because I speak different languages fluently, I've worked on hard sort of software projects from different angles and different point of views. So it's given me like this ability to figure out what's the same and what isn't the same. And generally speaking, like most of the issues that you'll encounter wherever you go with modern day software dev seems to be the same. So it's I guess it's more of a testament to how well the IT industry has moved on, because a
Mm.
plumber is a plumber is a plumber, right? And so it's become very similar in the IT industry, which is a good thing. And so that's kind of like my background is sort of heavily tech focused, especially in the financial industries. And I have my own channel where I sort of do mentoring and talk about sort of the forefront of AI and share projects that I kind of work on and collab with. But yeah, that's me.
Fantastic. So you're one of the few people that's a polyglot in both senses of the word in terms of natural languages and and programming languages. And
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of people like me for sure. Like, but maybe from the UK, it's more rare. I think, like, sort of, definitely in the Scandinavian countries, they're more linguistically, proficient. But for me, there's definitely a connection for sure. I think like I wanted to travel the world at a younger age, and when I got into software engineering in general, like I found the same rules applied. So if you learn one language, I think my first was Polish. Once I got fluent in that, I realized that when I picked up the next language, although it was totally different and I had to use a different part of my brain, like the process that I used myself for learning was similar. Like I would take notes, I would use different forums to learn. So not just visual, but
mm,
audio, doing it myself. And the same's with coding, right? Like if you're learning Java, and which is one of the harder ones and more traditional, it's not something that you could just pick up over a weekend, and you kind of need to build yourself a learning plan. And I kind of found that's how it worked for me in both sets, is just following a learning plan. And yeah. knowing yourself is more important than knowing the actual thing that you're trying to learn.
Yeah, definitely, and that applies to a lot in life as well. And the way we like to get things, get the audience to know you a bit better as well on the Code of Career is some quick fire questions.
Sure.
So the audience are very well accustomed to what I'm going to ask now, but it's always quite interesting what comes out of it, particularly considering our conversation already. So the first quick fire question was, what was your first ever computer?
A Fujitsu Lumen, I think the name was it's called. So yeah, a Fujitsu. That was my first PC, and my first gaming console was a Master System, Sega
Oh, very
Master
nice.
System.
Any particular games that you were a fan of back in the day?
I must say Wonder Boy and Sonic. You can't beat Sonic.
Very nice. And what about? I mean, we've already talked about the fact you're well travelled and a polyglot. What's your favourite tech city? Is it close to home in Edinburgh, or is it elsewhere?
My favorite tech city? Did you say?
Mm.
Oh, good question. I think I've got three. So I would say Edinburgh, London, and Shenzhen in China. Shenzhen is just absolutely amazing. But yeah, those are the three for different reasons. Unfortunately, I can't give one, but if I had to pick one, it would probably be London.
Yeah, London's awesome. Edinburgh's so good. I mean, I've moved back up here after a long time away, and I was down in London, and London's great. But Shenzhen, can't say I've been. From what I understand, it's a huge manufacturing hub for electronics. Is there a lot of software engineering there as well?
Yeah, I mean, it just goes part and parcel, right? Like how,
Mm,
the team that are building stuff, they'll bring the software engineers over. It's a massive software develop. It's Silicon Valley. It's China's Silicon Valley. It's
interesting.
it's it's amazing.
And were
Yeah.
you working there, or was it more just like a working holiday kind of thing?
Well, in Shenzhen specifically, I usually do talks and things because, again, I talk in Mandarin, so I'll go and do sort of tech talks where I share lessons learned and go there to listen to their lessons learned. But yeah, no, I've not worked in Shenzhen so far, not yet.
Oh, fantastic! That's awesome. You can do public speaking in Mandarin. That's seriously impressive.
People are more forgiving, so it's stressful, and you can take away your fear, right? Because you know that already you're stretching out. So yeah, people are more forgiving for sure.
Nice, nice. I've got I'm doing. I mean, it will have already happened by the time this podcast comes out. But next week, I'm doing a live demo of Remix Run, the new front end framework, and I think
Right.
it's all virtual. I'm going to be doing it in English, and I'm still very very nervous. So I admire
Right,
you being
right.
able to do it in Mandarin.
It's sometimes it's doing. I think people multilinguals will say like doing presentations in your second language is actually easier because you lose your inhibitions, because you lose
Mm,
your sort of restrictions on your way of thinking, and generally like people who are proficient in another language usually find they have a different way of thinking as well. Like I think differently in Mandarin than I do in English, and so and you have to get really good at explaining hard stuff simply because you take so long to learn the language, and you want to learn it to share your favorite stuff you care about that you're passionate about, and you're not going to wait until, oh, one day I'm fluent. So when you're halfway there, you're figuring out ways to say complicated ideas in simple processes and simple what's the word, like presentation. And so that generally makes people more receptive as well because you learn to be a better communicator.
fantastic. That's awesome. And so when you're not speaking and when you're coding, what type of music do you like to listen to? What powers you?
This is going to be quite embarrassing, right? So I actually listen to video game music, right? I know
You're not
people
the
like to listen
first.
to,
You're not the first to say it, so it's not embarrassing.
like, people like, oh, I listen to chill out, or I listen to lo-fi, or I listen. And it's like, no, I like to listen to any Square music, Squaresoft music,
Mm.
because it's there's just so much good quality content out there. I mean, just listen to any of the Final Fantasy albums, and it's like, yeah, that it's enough to, because there's no vocals, so I'm not getting distracted by words.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about people who will do it to movie soundtracks as well. I've
Oh,
mentioned it endlessly on here, but Mr. Robot soundtrack is one of my go-tos if I'm having a difficult day and I just want to plug in.
right.
Like just listening to Mr. Robot soundtrack it's a pretty good one.
Yeah, I've not actually. I've watched the show, but I can't remember. I can't remember the music, but I assume
Oh,
it must
it's
be quite.
amazing. It's
right?
really good. Yeah, if hacking had a soundtrack, it would be the Mr. Robot OST.
Ah, of course, of course. I mean, you can just chuck in YouTube, right? Like hacking music, and
Oh
then
yeah,
it's like it's all of a genre, right? So like you think you're Neo or whatever from the Matrix, but
yeah.
yeah,
As long as it's not
it's
what do the kids call it? Nightcore. Do you know? Do you know what?
Nightcore.
Oh, it's awful. It's-
Yeah, yeah. I have,
yeah,
I have, I have occasionally listened to like happy hardcore when I'm on like a code and flit. So if I need to get a product out by like a Friday and I need to go really, really fast, and I know that I'm not going to do it unless I pull some deep reserves out of me. So then I'll like switch on some, because like at that point you're no longer caring about code quality, right? You're just like get out the door, and so listen to the most motivating music possible. And so like
like Scooter and that kind of thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
Are you
There's a
ready?
guy at my gym that constantly puts on Scooter, and so I've just learned to like embrace it at this point.
Oh, you can't be Scooter. But I was thinking more along like the Japanese,
Mhm.
Japan core or Happy Hardcore, which is like more faster. Like a Scooter's quite slow,
Yeah.
but you want something with a faster tempo, especially if you're like using Python, because you're using the enter button a lot,
Yeah,
and so you're just like tap 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 tap, next line, next line, next line. So yeah, it's quite useful, but not my go-to, shall we say.
fair enough. And what about when you like to do your work? Would you say you're an early bird or night owl?
A night owl, but I'm transitioning to an early bird.
Mm.
So I'm predominantly a night owl, but it's affected my health because I don't know when to stop, and I've I've built some of my best products in up to like 4 in the morning, and the new normal. It certainly allows people to become night owls, but as you sort of hit your 30s, 40s, right, like health issues pop up and you begin to realize that, oh, I actually need to take care of my body now. So yeah, it's like I need to figure out how to transition, and I find now I'm transitioning to being an early bird. I find I'm more productive as long as I get a proper early start. Like, because when I wake up, I've got. I think it's all to do with energy reserve management.
Mm.
I appreciate this is a short form one. Sorry, apologies. This is a quick fire question, but I think it's to do with energy management, and so yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I'm transitioning to the early bird thing as well. It's a bit it can be a tricky one, but a little hack I find, particularly as we're getting into summer now, is sleeping with the curtains open. It's quite a good way of doing it because then you naturally wake up with the
Wow,
daylight.
wow,
Um,
that's a good idea.
but yeah, it's yeah, it can be a tough one, especially if like going to sleep with the curtains open. If I live in fairly central Edinburgh. I live in Morningside, so there's like street lights and
Yeah,
stuff. So that
yeah,
that
yeah,
sometimes scuppers things a little bit, but yeah, it's quite a good strategy I find. So
yeah.
so prior to the days of code, what job did you want when you were a kid?
Engineer. So my dad was an engineer. My granddad was an engineer on the Spitfire, and my
Hmm.
great granddad was an engineer on the sister ship of the Titanic. So he actually was invited to get on the Titanic on the maiden voyage because he was working on the Olympic as a sister ship, and he got the invitation. And just as he was about to, I know it's a romanticized story, but you know. Maybe my family are like exaggerators, but the story is that just before he was getting on to the Titanic, the telegram boy gave him a telegram saying his holiday's been cancelled and he needs to get back on the Olympic because there's let's say production bug to be fixed. So yeah, he missed the ship, and then here I am today. So families
Serendipitous.
are yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, family's all engineers, so I want to be an engineer.
very nice. That's cool. Do any particular type of engineer, like automotive, aeronautical?
At the time, mechanical was the most interesting to me. Electrical engineering was also interesting, but
Mm.
I hadn't known that software engineering was a thing. Um, and so I kind of like part of my heart feels like I failed like my family because I'm not actually an engineer. Software engineering, we just call ourselves that because it sounds cool. But so people in my family, my friends assure me there is a degree of engineering to it, so I'll take that.
Yeah, we haven't a title. Like my dad's a satellite engineer by trade, so
Right.
Like he was building products that like launching stuff into space, and I'm building create, read, update, delete applications in JavaScript. But we're both
yeah,
engineers.
yeah, you're like figuring out how to change the color of a button, right? And he's like literally like launching stuff that keeps the country safe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I know he listens. So hi, Dad. Yeah, I wish I could build satellites as well. Um, anyways, moving on to more at your story. Obviously, we talked. You were always interested in engineering in general, but how did your
Sure.
journey into becoming a software engineer start? What was that process?
It's a bit bananas, to be honest, because like I come from a really poor family, like hyper poor. It's why I
Mhm.
learned a lot of languages and traveled a lot because of like just disenfranchisement of the system. And so like right in the beginning, I was like doing everything. I was like a bricklayer. I worked in a chicken factory, like hanging chickens for like 4 years. I thought I would never get out of that. I thought that was it. That was my life, and I was just going to be. And I was like super low, like a minimum wage night shift. 6 p.m. to half 2 in the morning. And then I finally, moved a little bit on. I went into insurance, and then I actually found like I left the factory and went into an office space, and was so scared by the office space, I went back to the factory again because I was like, "Holy moly! Like these people really stab each other in the back." And
Yeah,
so, so I was like, "Yeah." And so eventually, I did a bit of I got into renewable energy, and that kind of like spurred my passion for like ideas of fundamentals, and I took on a physics course. So I had by that time I'd made up enough money that I could support myself to go to uni, and so I picked physics because I just thought, go for the fundamentals.
mm,
And by the time I'd finished the course, I'd had some exposure to C++. Back then, physicists, it was there wasn't out the box tools that could help you to do stuff like if you wanted to calculate relative motion of the planets. You had to use either a really bulky old physics software tool, like the back in those days, MathCAD were rubbish, or you'd have to write it all out in C++, or a language of your choice yourself. So I had to do all of that, and my first, let's say the first round with coding was a failure for me. I was totally against it. I was like, this sucks. I was like, it's like, who would want to do this for their whole life? And it turns out, oh, that's me. So yeah, the first round I wasn't so impressed, but
and
like
that's so
later
often
on,
the case, isn't it? Like people give
yeah,
it a try the first time. You remember people that come to me on like TikTok and like, do you know what, Cam? I tried this the first time round and I didn't like it, but I'm thinking about giving it another go. And it's just like, just do it. Like the amount of times you don't
yeah.
enjoy coding the first time. I think I tried to learn like 2 or 3 times before it actually stuck.
Yeah, yeah. There's definitely it's almost like an acquired taste, right? And I think the problem was in the first time, the big. It's the same with everything. Like the learning curve is so steep, and the rewards are so few, and it's hard to see what you're going to get by investing hours and hours. So what had happened was after that, like I had ended up. Um, I went and worked in China, and then at that time, I was getting exposure to a lot of business, and I thought, right, okay, maybe it's time to give it another go. And so I joined Harvard CS50. So for any of those new coders out there, you probably have heard of it.
It's an amazing
And
resource.
yeah, and at the time I was like one of the earlier ones, and so it was like actually a big thing. It's like, oh my god, this is Harvard, like it was like what, and so there was a degree of prestige of like just being able to access the resources, because before
Mm,
then it was all the opening of the internet, and they've done such a great job. David Malin, I think his name is
yeah.
he's just I met him in person, and he's
Oh,
like
did you?
double.
What's he
Yeah,
like? He's
he's
such an impressive guy.
he's double my height
Is he?
because I'm a small guy and he's a big guy. And yeah, I talked to him, and he's very charismatic, very friendly, and the whole, because they did a CS50 in London, and that really really propelled me into IT. So to be honest, big thanks to CS50, because they they were so broad. Like there was at that time they were like, okay, here's a bit of cloud, here's a bit of back end, here's a bit of front end, here's how you can make a game, right? And so like they gave a little bit of something for everyone. And at the time, I was already getting back into coding, but that super helped. So for anybody who feels, I guess, like demotivated, uh, do like the first couple of uh, uh, videos on CS50, like do those courses, and it kind of really helps.
Yeah, definitely. He's got a really good way of explaining complicated
Yeah.
topics, and you will find like that C module is tough, but
Yeah.
it's kind of it's like just jumping into deep end of the pool, and the resources behind it are really good. And once you're done with the C, everything else just seems easier.
Yep.
So it's quite cleverly done the way they do that, and people have been. It's really interesting to say this because an episode that will be out by now on Code a Career. Simon Barker, who runs all the code, he learned when it was still on an FTP, like all the resources and everything for CS50, and he was saying he was getting it via iTunes U and everything, and
Right.
that was like getting on 20 years ago now. So it's pretty impressive, like how many lives that one course managed to change, and the fact that you get to stick Harvard on your LinkedIn, which has
Yeah.
led to quite a lot of disappointed recruiters reaching out to me.
Yeah, and also like David Matlin himself, if I remember correctly, he wasn't an IT guy either. Like there are some people that get in way later in their careers and
Mm,
do fine. Like some of them dominate. So it's like it's not. That's what makes it so much better than your traditional careers because
yeah.
like the educate, like as we see Google and Facebook, they've dropped all of their educational requirements for IT engineers. Whereas I like people like my age and older remember like getting into certain jobs, even like a Java engineer back in the day, which was bread and butter. You needed a degree, like you needed a proper degree, and the university that you got it from made a difference on
Mm,
your application. Like it's like now, I think Elon Musk really set the scene, right? Like he was the first to say, I do not care what uni you're from, and literally, like it like really disgruntled him when people I remember his employees were coming up doing talks and saying like, "Oh, I got this PhD," and Elon was like, "No, move on, next, next, next. We don't care what your background is. Just tell us the subject matter." And then I think the rest of Silicon Valley followed suit,
yeah.
and I think that's the situation we're in today. So like, you can just pick it up anytime, like literally any age, anytime, anywhere.
And quite rightly as well. This is one of the best. The tech industry, I genuinely think, is one of the best way. Is one of it's difficult to achieve true meritocracy, but I believe tech is one of the most meritocratic industries, and it's in the long run, if more people approach hiring like tech do, like with the dropping, and I've noticed outside of tech, like a lot of like the big four accountancies and stuff have started dropping degree requirements and stuff.
Yeah,
The more you're going to have an equal society, and actually the university system is somewhat flawed, and I'd almost describe it as like a legacy system. And I think
yeah.
by the time I have children, I'd wonder if a conventional university would even exist anymore when they're ready to go. Because I guess, assuming I don't have a kid next year, I guess that would be in 25 years time. I'd be very curious to see what a university would look like by then, because tuition is going up, and the
Yep.
product is going down. That's the thing.
Yep.
So it's an interesting trend we're looking at.
And the resources, like half of the resources, if not more, are readily available online. So what you're really paying for is mentorship and experience transfer from those who are strong in the industry. So there, exactly as you say, there could be platforms to disrupt that or break it down. Yeah, I can totally see that. And at least in IT, at least you've got a shot at a meritocracy. It may not be the case, but at least there's a chance.
Yeah, absolutely. And presented with that comment, because this is not a political podcast, my student loan interest rate has just been bumped up to 12%. So, presented with that comment, if you're thinking about going to university, keep that in mind. Moving swiftly on, you're someone that has worked in DevOps a lot. And one of the most common questions I get is, Cam, I'm seeing this really highly paid sector within engineering, DevOps. What is it? How can I get into it? So I figured I'd pass the baton on to someone who really has been there, because my focus is more on like front end development and that sort of thing. What is DevOps, and why and how can people get into it?
Okay, so that's it's a loaded question, right? And it's like the there's many different people who'll answer this in different ways, and like the de facto safe way to answer the question, like, and I'll give you a few different flavors of the
Hmm.
answer, right? So the de facto safe way is to say DevOps is not a technology, it's a culture, right? And this is what a lot of people who uh, buy what they're selling, right? Buy their own thing that they're selling will say things like that. And to some extent, there's definitely truth in that, right? Because there's so much cultural framework embedded within DevOps idea of infrastructure as code, working to agile principles, that definitely there. But that's the optimistic sell you the product route, right? The other, there's other interpretations. Some will say DevOps is a stopgap because developers and operations can't play nicely together, right? And then that's why you've got ML ops, because ML engineers and DevOps engineers can't play nicely
And
together.
now DevSecOps as well.
DevSecOps. Yeah. So like, for example, the ML ops is because there's an argument over productionized data between data scientists and automation engineers. And so this will keep happening, right? And there's like, I think there's like blockchain ops or blockchain as a service, and there's BizOps. And this is a theme that could spin off and spiral. But ultimately, what's happened is nothing has come close to matching DevOps. So there must be some truth to that. So there must be some utility to DevOps, because why would it retain a decade plus? Because it was pushed in 2008. But to be clear, like, I'm friends with one of the founders of Patrick DeBoer, who you'll probably see him comment on my LinkedIn a lot, and we talk about this topic quite a lot. And I think he's moved on a little bit in his mind from when if you Google who created DevOps, his name comes up in bold as the first one. It's not even the first search; it's just flashes up as
Yeah.
their like a label. But and he has kind of moved on, and his idea is different from my idea, which is different from some of Kim's idea, who is one of the other founders. And so it's it leads to a problem. So this is the more cynical interpretation, which is the reason the salary is so hyperinflated is because a lot of people don't know what it means. But then the positive spin on that is that, yeah, it means that you need a really strong engineer that can be that can span multiple domains. And so that's actually when people hire for a DevOps engineer, there are a lot of recruiters or a lot of hiring managers in their mind. What they're looking for is a strong automation engineer who is good at cloud, is good at back end, knows a bit of front end, can get by on a bit of front end. And it's
Mm.
almost like it's the expansion of a full stack engineer, a full stack developer. Um, and
Yeah,
and
the
so
Swiss Army developer almost.
yeah, I would say it's as close as you can get. I mean, because some will argue that DevOps engineers don't write code, but then for everyone that you find that scripts, you'll find another that's writing Python code. So
Yeah.
it's tricky. It's so I know that's not the answer people were looking for, and because again, you can find a DevOps engineer who'll just give you an answer as quick as a hat. They'll say, oh, it's orchestration, or it's automation, it's pipeline building, it's a culture,
Yeah.
and ultimately it could be all of those things. And so really, if I had to summarize it in one sentence, I would say a DevOps engineer is a automation engineer with a very fuzzy defined boundary.
Mm.
So your job is to automate and orchestrate, but how far out of that you'll step depends on your ability and the expectation of the company. And the expectation of the company is usually quite high.
Yeah.
So that usually means you need to learn a lot.
Yeah. I mean, on a related basis, people see those high salaries and they ask me about it a lot, and I generally say my kind of cookie cutter advice for this is get a job as a conventional software engineer first, and then learn the DevOps practices on the job, and then kind of when you're ready for it, go into DevOps. Like, I don't know how you feel about that, but like for me, it's like I think there's a lot more junior software engineering jobs than there are junior DevOps jobs out there. Maybe that's
Yep.
changing a bit, but I would say if people really want to get into it, get a back end job probably, and
Mhm.
then basically almost become a DevOps engineer within the job yourself, or pick up the skills you need doing that and then move into a DevOps role.
So there's definitely a strong argument for that, right? Because the reason DevOps was created was to fill the void between developers and operations, and to help them coordinate stronger and move products between the two of them. And obviously, the world has got far more complex since then, right? So you've got web development, backend, database engineers, data lake, and so maybe I would maybe just alter slightly your point and say something like, pick up something that you like, right? So if you want to build if you're a front end guy or girl, or if you're into database design and database schemas or whatever, like do something that you like and do that for a while, because then you'll get more of a, because DevOps, you have to know the full software lifecycle, software delivery lifecycle. So you need to have at least worked. It's almost like, let's put this a different way. I worked in a chicken factory, right? And in a chicken factory, right at the beginning, I was quite brutal, but that shall we say, take care of the chickens and put them to bed, right?
I think I
And
get
then
the euphemism.
and then later on, you hang them. There's a lot. There'll be packing. There will be scanning. There will be
Maybe the vegetarians skip 2 minutes now. Yeah.
apologies. Yeah, and feel free to edit this. But if you take any factory analogy, which is becoming more and more popular in software development, there are many points on the factory line that you can take, right? So you could be in any factory. You could be packing, dispatching, labeling. You could be weighing, and what happens is the people who rise to the top are the ones who are the supervisors or the charge hands or the ones who are the managers. They did their rounds, right? So they maybe started their career at the start of the line, on the conveyor belt, and then later on they worked up and they were able to do a bit of the programming, because there's even programmers in factories, and then maybe they did like later dispatch in the after shift, and so then they became so competent, and they knew how the cycle went. They knew not the software delivery life cycle, but the product delivery life cycle of the factory. And then they moved into automating, because they cared about the company and they knew how to do it properly, because they'd been there. Like, they knew the challenges that developers have, they know the challenges that the operations have, and that's a better position. That's obviously the optimal position, but usually what happens is somebody will do development for a while, or they'll do sysadmin for a while, and then they'll jump into DevOps, and that's fine. So I would just say, just to take your point and just expand it to say, work on the line, work on the production line at some point, get a bit of experience, and then if you feel you're really into automating, maybe give DevOps a go.
Yeah, definitely. That sounds really great, and the exact kind of thing I'd like to clip out and show people when they ask me about that. So
Awesome.
there's actually time for a new feature now. So you are the first guest, and unfortunately a bit of a guinea pig here on this one. So hopefully the listeners, this will be all super clear. But what I'm going to do is I have a Discord community, and if the listeners want to discuss tech with like-minded individuals and want to advance their career, then I definitely recommend they jump in and chat with us. There's well over 100 of us on there now chatting, and we are now voting for our favorite question from the community for the podcast guest. So a few days ago, I said, "This is Adam. He's going to come on the podcast." I shared your LinkedIn. I hope you don't mind that. And
No, that's
had
fine.
a poke around and saw what you were all about. And the community decided that Jordan's question was their favorite, and Anchor, my distribution software, allows you to leave voice messages, which is really cool. So Jordan has left a voice message for us.
Hi Cam, question for Adam. As someone who's just starting out, how much knowledge or what level of knowledge of security would you say is needed for applying for my first roles as a junior developer? And what resources would you suggest going to as a beginner?
Oh, that's a good one. So let's try to start from the back. So I've got lots of resources, and I'll share them after. So I've got my own Adams, I forget, what did I call it? The security compendium. So check my resource out, because I made it. Other than that, I think there are it's really hard, because to answer the question, like, you want to get into web development, and there are lots of security practices and frameworks that you need to be aware of, and you need to understand about the communication between back end, front end, web server, and things. And what really I'm trying to say is the area of security is so wide and so vast. We're all learning about security. Nobody's done. I was working in the global chief security office in Barclays, working on security products, and some of the best engineers out there, like some of the best engineers in the world were there, cyber analysts. We're all, constantly learning new things. Part of working in security is having that flexible learn everyday mindset. I mean, how are you going to adapt to day zero threats? So for those who don't know what day zero is it means it's a new vulnerability or a threat that's never been come across before. So in web development, like the answer is to be brutally honest, you don't need to know security to begin with, because you're doing web development and you'll learn it as you go. You'll learn how to, certificates, encryption and things, but it can't hurt. And what you'll find in the modern security community is they're trying to push a different culture of security isn't just for the security guys, but it's for everyone. And it should become part of what you do, right? Like when you leave your house, right, you check your keys, you make sure the door's locked. Is your alarm on if you've got an alarm, or the windows closed? There are things that you just do. And that's going to happen with IT. And those things you'll learn on the job, and you'll learn as part of the practices that you do. So there's no specific things, but if I had to point out a few, I would say things like, right, you're getting into coding, you're going to be a web developer, you're going to be putting lots of stuff on GitHub or Git or Stash. So any personal credentials, keep them off. Get into the practice of separating your repo into two repos. The main one where you do all the stuff, and then you can have like a secondary folder where you keep your keys and just point to it. So there are like things that will trip you up really early on. Like again, AWS accounts, if you're learning cloud, GCP accounts, it's so, there's so many people that make bad policies and then find out that people have used their account to mine crypto. And this happens to senior engineers, right? So I literally have had senior engineers call me up in the night saying like, I've got a $5,000 bill on my AWS account. How can I back this out? And I'm like, dude, you can't. Yeah, like that's it. You need to call them. Fortunately, they did back it out for him after a long discussion, but they're not always going to be that forgiving. So really, like, you can't take your common sense, like rely on your instincts as much as you can to begin with. Like if it feels unsafe, it's probably unsafe.
Yeah, that's just such a good motto for like internet usage in general. And like, if it feels unsafe, it's probably unsafe. If it feels too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true, which is what I wish I told myself when I was 12 and I thought you could download more RAM. Yeah. But yeah, I totally agree. And
wait, you can't?
No, you can't, I'm afraid. Yeah, they're lying to you, I'm afraid.
Oh, no.
And you are not, in fact, the millionth visitor to this website. The other thing I was going to say as well, kind of related to Jordan's point, if people are curious and they have no knowledge of IT security, I'm probably doing the wrong thing by directing people literally to another podcast right now. But Darknet Diaries is probably arguably my favorite non-rugby related podcast that I listen to on a regular basis. It is amazing. And the production value is incredible and the stories are so cool. I don't know if you've checked it out before, but it's unreal.
Yeah, I've not checked it out, but another thing I'd mention is I've got this site called Darkwire, which I've automated all social media insights. And one of the things that I found, so it's like it's part of my website, and it's like 4 or 5 pages which I pull Twitter, Reddit, like feeds from all of our social platforms. And one thing that I found is it's like people find out about attacks way before the news, right?
Oh yeah, for sure.
So like a really good thing to do is like just follow security people on Twitter, right? Because there's loads of them, and you want to follow the ones that use more positive wording. And the reason is because they're more likely to share learning resources. So you'll find the cynics, and there are loads of them, right? But you want to look for these ones that are sharing, positive learning resources, and they're everywhere. So go to Twitter and type in infosec, hashtag infosec, or hashtag vulnerabilities, hashtag cybersecurity, and look at the posters, and you'll find the ones that are usually ranked at the top, they're generally sharing good content.
Mm. Yeah, and it's something that's just so topical as well. And even if you aren't going to be a security engineer, and I love that Jordan has asked this question, despite the fact he wants to be a web developer, because it's just so good to have a knowledge of these things, and it's
Yeah,
such a plus
yeah,
for an employer because everyone's vulnerable to it. I mean, it's just come out today that 10 Downing Street was breached with by hackers from the Gulf. So
yeah.
it affects everyone, and it's really a good idea to read up on it. No matter, I mean, if you've got 40 minutes into this podcast and you don't know anything about software engineering, fair play. But even if you're not a software engineer or even interested in it, then it would behoove everyone to learn a bit about IT security for sure.
Yeah, it's just so widespread. I mean, again, just take another example of the 650 million that had been mined and stolen from North Korea, right? And the government are being really like tightly lipped on it, but it's almost a cert that it was phishing. So it wasn't like a technical exploit through like a firewall or something. Just somebody replied to an email,
Human
right? So
error
it's
is
like
always the weakest cog in the machine, isn't it?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Social engineering is one of
Mm.
the most successful vectors. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Trust nobody, kids. Trust nobody. Uh, and moving, well, I guess kind of related to security. In fact, actually completely related to security because the financial industry probably has some of the strongest security there is, or at least one would hope so. What's the financial industry like? Because you've worked for a number of the big banks. Here in because Edinburgh obviously has a huge financial scene a lot of people don't realize about. Um, what would you say, like, to give someone some advice who's curious about getting into the scene? What should they know?
Yeah, I mean, and also I've been in London as well, so I've
Hmm.
done work, across Edinburgh and London, the finance sectors in the UK, and they're the same, right? They all work together, right? So
Yeah.
Manchester, London, Edinburgh, the employees will work between the different units, but they'll be working on the same goal. And finance sector is really exciting to get into because you're not just learning to do tech, you're learning about like the backbone of society, which is
Yeah.
our economy. And so and you'll find, right, it's quite funny because you'll find like a lot of people in banks want to work in fintechs. They're like,
Mm.
I want to work in a Revolut, and then you'll find people in fintechs want to work in banks, right? And so there's a lovely migrational flow between the two. So really, like, to get into them, like, obviously having a passion or an interest, at least like a passing interest in finance, like understanding why do we employ so many people? Like, what are we doing? Like, even if you don't know that, that's fine. Just like think of that question, have that question in your mind, and Google and explore. So there's an element of like just be even a little bit interested in like why do they need so many engineers? What is so important about finance and IT, and why is finance and IT so tightly knit? That's the first thing. The next thing is there's an element of maturity. I know sounds it's quite bizarre coming from me, a guy that sort of posts like anime memes and stuff, but like but like there is definitely an element of maturity in finance where it's like you how you present yourself and how. So if I, for example, if I've worked in small startups and worked with small companies and middle companies and big companies, and some of the IT engineers will have a very loose interpretation of work ethic, or a loose interpretation of um, how they should interact and collaborate with others, right? Like, you'll get lots of lone wolves in fintech startups because they can't take the pressure of people pushing onto them, so they just do their own thing, and they're very siloed. In finance, it's the complete opposite. It's a very social space, right? It's
Mm.
it's there. Of course, there are lone wolves, but they're few, right? The vast majority in finance are social beings, and we have to share, we have to collaborate. There's a lot of talking, um, and that's not just because we like to talk, but because we're working on really hard systems that take more than one person to understand because they're complicated. You have a data architect, environments, infrastructure, backend, business. We're not even talking about. Then you've got different business representatives, and you have all. In a sense, it's a bit like being at the UN because you have so many different people representing so many different arms of the company, which each arm in its own is, is a fully fleshed trade that has companies specifically dedicated to them. So you're working in an ecosystem that basically couldn't be bigger. And so you need to have this element of maturity, because you cannot assume that you know more than 1% of what people know in the room, because there are just so many different opinions and so many different there are so many different stakeholders with different objectives in mind, and your job is to present what your thing is in a holistic way. And so that doesn't mean you don't have to hit these thresholds to get into finance, but you have to be mature. Like, you have to be open to self-development, not just from a technical point of view, but from a personal point of view and a people point of view. And yeah, and if you're open, and if you're mature, and if you're like got an interest in collaborating and sharing, taking the burden off other people, then you're going to do really well.
Yeah, that sounds really cool, and a ringing endorsement as well for an industry that gets a bit of stick unfairly. I think, actually, in terms of like a place to work, I think a lot of people I know really enjoy working in financial institutions, and I think the image of them is somewhat outdated in terms of like how they are to work. So that sounds really cool, and
Haters going to hate.
yeah, exactly. Talking closer to home now, I'm really curious to, because you're part of the growing contingent of guests on here who are also living in the central belt of Scotland. What do you see as the future of the tech scene up here, and how can we improve upon it? Is there any sign, anything that you've really got your eye on?
Yeah, so what I'm finding in general is Scotland specifically are developing specialist areas. So, for example, in Dundee, we all know or maybe we should know, Dundee had been a home for gaming, and a lot of strong gaming engineers, game development had come out of there. And Edinburgh's obviously in the financial sector, and Glasgow seems to be hard hitting in many different fronts. But I think they're more in the creatives as well. So, like, there's a lot of movies that are shot in Glasgow and edited on editing software there. And so what we're finding is it's like Scotland is acting as a mini hub of specialist cities and specialist towns for certain domains. And what that means is you're going to attract a lot of diverse talent. And if you imagine with the COVID breaking down barriers, so not everybody needs to commute to London now. And there's an outflow of people who live in London and are originally from Scotland, or have, I've spoken to multiple in the cyber world. That's a good example. I've spoken to multiple cyber guys who have no affiliation with Scotland whatsoever. One of the guys talking to from yesterday, he was from Nigeria. He's like, yeah, we're just moving to Scotland. And he said, he loves it. He said, every time I'm here, he says it's the perfect balance for lifestyle that he wants. And so what you actually find is Scotland is attracting high caliber, specialized talent. So that means we might not all get on with each other, right? So we might have like different, because like if I'm, if what guy A is a game engineer and guy B is working on medical software imaging, they're very different domains, but they're hyper specialized. And so what I would say is maybe a challenge and an opportunity is somehow figuring out how to herd these cats, right? Because there's just so many, like it's. I don't think the future of Scotland is being this is the hub for medical tech and this is the hub for finance. It's going to spin and for much longer, especially with COVID. So I think we need to look into more general, like as a software hub in general, like and have more open workspaces, which we begin to have in Edinburgh, where you've got
Like code base and stuff.
code base. That's the one exact
Yeah.
thing I was thinking of. So I think that could be the future, and it seems to work quite nicely. So a more abstract, general place for specialists to come and move and pivot. But yeah, and Scotland's heavily socialising, is one of the most progressive countries in Europe by far, in the world as well, especially in renewable technologies and new initiatives. So I think like the opportunity here. It's like people might think, well, I want to start a business, so I'm going to go to Silicon Valley, or I'm going to go to Shenzhen, or I'm going to go to London. I need to accrue capital. That's where all the VCs are. But if you actually think properly, like the talent pool, like per capita and the available space, cheapness of facilities, you've got a really strong case of doing things in Scotland, like of at least creating breeder hubs. So I think there's huge opportunity because it's just so much dynamism.
Mm.
It's a small country, right? So it's like you could get an idea from the north to the south really quickly. It's basically right. Like people can propagate ideas pretty quickly.
Get the idea from John O'Groats down to Berwick upon Tweed very quickly.
That's the one.
Actually, Berwick upon Tweed is just south of the border, so maybe I don't know, stop in Hoyk or Melrose or somewhere. I don't know what the southernmost town is.
Yeah, but you get the idea. Yeah, yeah. I think that's it. Like, I know it sounds like I'm trying to sell the place. Obviously, Scotland.
Oh, mate, I sell it every week on here. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like don't expect the weather, right? And definitely don't expect like healthy cuisine. But if you can forgive those two, then you'll love it.
Cool, yeah. So it's been really great and insightful chatting with you, Adam. Obviously, you're, as anyone who is connected with you on LinkedIn would know, you were a very busy man, constantly with a lot of projects and irons in the fire. What are you working on at the moment? Is there anything you particularly want to shout out?
Yes, sure. So, like, I think I've got two projects in the go, but the main one I want to sort of talk about is this. So, I'm working on this sort of dateless architecture. So, if you think of like a Siri or an Alexa or a Cortana, so like an AI assistant which can do more than what they can do, but also the core feature I'm trying to get out is that it does all of the training locally on your side, and so it keeps all of the data on your side of the machine. So if you ask, like, get me my emails or connect to my bank account, it will only make the bare minimum of external connections with data, and when it does, you'll be alerted. So that the AI is more sensitive towards keeping things on your end, and it trains to your specific taste. So not just its personality, but the way that it works with you. So it is a coding assistant as well. So it's like GitHub Autopilot on steroids. And I'm not sure if I'm going to sell it or open source it, but like it's become a project I've been working on for 5 or 6 years. And this is just the first part of it, but I think it'll be useful to a lot of people, especially for those who need like a real productivity assistant. So look out for that. Its name's Amu, AMU, and you probably see a lot of that on my LinkedIn and Twitter and stuff. But I'll continue to share it. But I think hopefully get an alpha out at the end of the year.
That sounds really exciting. I can't wait to see that. And you mentioned your LinkedIn there. Is that the best way for people to get in touch with you? Any other platforms to follow you on?
Yeah, I think mostly LinkedIn because I'm too much of a geek, right? So because like I'm mostly on GitHub and LinkedIn. So if not LinkedIn, GitHub, which is Murchie85, Murchie 85. But that's really about it. LinkedIn doesn't do any social stuff, which I'm trying to make change. But other than that, yeah, I guess and my YouTube video. So if you just search Adam McMurchie, like my full name, which I'm hoping you've got in the description.
Yeah, I hope so.
This guy, right? But yeah, if you search that, you'll find my YouTube channel, and I've got I've got interesting stuff. I built Tetris using assembler and things like that. So you find some funny bits and bobs.
Fantastic. That sounds really good. And thank you again for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you as well to the listeners for checking out another episode of The Code of Career. In the meanwhile, as I stumble over my words, if you enjoyed this episode, please do check out, both feel free to get in touch with Adam, how he mentioned, and then as well, please do join our Discord. We're building a really strong community on there. And as you heard from Jordan asking earlier in the show, we're really increasing our audience participation as well. So do join us on there. The link to that is in the description. But until then, I hope you have a great week and happy coding.